that whole name is a misnomer to say the least. They're actually, if you run your fingers across them, they're prickly. They feel like sandpaper. But yeah, anyway, I mean, there's no way you can mistake it with anything else. They are masters at disguise. And so these two pictures are taken locally. The one on the left was from snorkeling in the Swan River. Can you see them peeking out under the rocks? That's very typical sculpin behavior. They'll hide in the rocks whenever they can. The one on the right is a pretty interesting picture off the internet. This is shows it how well they blend in. They do seem the ability to camouflage themselves, and they can change their colorations a little bit in the stream. So if they're moving from a light gravel area to a dark silt, they can change their body color to blend in. They're amazing how well they do that. Now, this fish fascinates me because it is a fish that actually does not like to swim. These guys are the original homebodies, and they would have no problem with staying home quarantined, to say the least. In fact, some research has been done on sculpins, not here in Montana, but elsewhere, where the sculpin, actually a whole bunch of them, wouldn't move any more than 20 meters. They just stay in the same spot as far as they can, as long as they can. And what they're doing is they take those giant pectoral fins, like I talked about before, and they hang on to the rock in front of them. They kind of wrap their fins around them and hang on. That way, the current's washing over them all the time. They don't have to swim. They don't want to bother swimming. They'll sit there on the bottom looking for a passing insect and go grab them. Another thing that's interesting about this fish is their spawning habitats. Excuse me, I got a frog in my throat. So these fish eat insects and eggs. They love trout eggs, but in return, the trout want to eat them. So what they came up with a clever way of laying eggs. Instead of just broadcasting the eggs out like trout does and let the eggs settle in the gravel, their eggs are slightly sticky when they first come out of the female. The female will swim upside down underneath an overhanging rock, and those eggs will stick to the bottom of a rock. So it's really hard for the trout to get to it. Pretty good trick if you ask me. So for each one of these species, I thought just for fun, we'll try to identify what its spiritual twin might be if it was a bird. So I got to think of, well, the sculpin, because it has an unusual way of getting about, it's not a typical swimmer at all, and it's kind of drab. It blends in. In my opinion, the best twin would be the brown creeper, because the brown creepers move up and down the barks, don't they? And they blend in so well. Yeah. That makes sense? And this whole spirit bird thing is just for fun. Okay, we'll go on to the next one. This is a mind-blowing fish, the paddlefish. This is, there's nothing else like the paddlefish. And even an amateur person, maybe who's never really thought about native fish, looking at a paddlefish would instantly recognize this is not normal. Okay, there's just, everything about this fish is bizarre. It is truly an ancient species. And you can just tell by looking at this thing how old it is. There are fossil records of this guy going back 120 million years. So think about that. That is a very long time ago. 120 million years ago was right about right after the dinosaurs were bombed off, whatever happened with the asteroid, and the Earth was just kind of bouncing around, if you will, still from that event. There were about 6 species of paddlefish found in the fossil records. 4 of them apparently went extinct. 2 of them have maintained themselves to modern time. That is impressive. And apparently they haven't changed at all. If you look at them, I mean, this bizarre looking thing. So this is the American paddlefish. The American paddlefish is found in the Mississippi, Missouri, Yellowstone ranges. They used to be found in Ohio River. They're long gone now. And there's, strangely enough, there's a few paddlefish in Lake Huron, but not the other Great Lakes. But anyway, when people look at the paddlefish, right away, the first thing you notice is the paddle. All right, it's that weird nose. When the fish first hatches, it does not have a paddle. It looks like a normal fish. And until about 2 or 3 months, then it starts to grow this rostrum. It's actually called a rostrum. And the paddle grows to a certain length. And when the fish is about 5 or 6 years old, it stops growing. And the rest of the fish will keep growing bigger and fatter and fatter. And the paddle is actually smaller relatively in size. What is the function of the paddle? Well, the shorter answer is nobody really knows. It is a very strange thing. It does have electrochemical receptors around it, all around the paddle. but also has the same receptors on its head and its gill plates. So, okay, what is it trying to do? Nobody's really sure. What this fish does, it swims through really turbid water, mouth open, a lot like a whale, and it's filtering and eating plankton and zooplankton. Is it using the electrical sensors to find the zooplankton? Maybe, but there's not a lot of current, if you will, in these little tiny creatures. And so, honestly, people aren't really sure what the heck it does. And some biologists, unfortunately, did cut off some of their paddles to see can the fish survive. Well, yeah, it survived. It didn't do well. I probably wouldn't do well either if you cut off a limb. So it's still kind of a mystery what this is. I'm going to speculate that the paddle is a throwback from what it needed 120 million years ago. And for some reason, it just hasn't gotten around to getting rid of it. Another weird thing about this fish is look at those bizarre gill cover, that long pointed gill cover pointing down. Why is it so long? Nobody knows. It's a bizarre thing. Look at the tail. Now, this picture is not extremely clear on that. The tail is very, very primitive. Most fish will have a spine that goes down and stops at the base of the tail, and then the tail itself is 100% fin, soft material. Whereas the paddlefish, the spine continues into the tail all the way up the top half of the lobe. Why? It's unknown. It seems to be a very poor way of locomotion, but that's probably what it thought of 120 million years ago. It just never got around to changing the plan. It has extremely poor eyesight. The eyes are almost a joke. They can pretty much tell white from dark, and that's about it. So they don't rely on their eyes at all. They're just swimming around in this really turbid water, mouth open, eating zooplankton and phytoplankton. Now, this fish, like I said, is found in the Missouri and the Yellowstone River, and it's an interesting species. It's how do you catch it? It actually has a recreational fishery. You will not catch them with a lure or a fly or anything like that. The only way you can catch them is actually snagging, because remember, they're eating phytoplankton, small, small stuff. But strangely enough, they're actually very valuable. This is a commercially valuable species. It's mind-blowing how interesting this thing is. Now, the flesh is certainly edible. It apparently tastes a lot like catfish. But what makes this thing stand out is its eggs. It's caviar. It's outstanding quality. So paddlefish are related distantly to sturgeon. And a lot of people have heard of sturgeon for the caviar. But the paddlefish tends to have more eggs and is actually just as good quality. So in Glendive, Montana, they have an interesting program going on down there where the city has the Chamber of Commerce provides free fish cleaning stations throughout the area. Encourage anglers come. We'll clean your fish for you. We'll give you the fillets in return if we can have the eggs. And then they sell the eggs. They got special permission from the state of Montana to sell. It's a fundraiser for the city of Glendive. Very unusual. And to give you an idea how valuable these eggs are for caviar, in the 1970s, the Soviet Union approached the United States and said, is there any chance we could have 5,000 fingerling, paddlefish fingerling, to take to Russia, and we would like to grow them in our agriculture system for caviar? And they got permission. So they got 5,000 paddlefish from Montana, actually. They went to the Soviet Union. Their projects are still there today. They have a very successful program in Eastern Russia where they're growing these fish out just to harvest the caviar. Think about how very expensive that must be to do that. To feed these things, it takes at least a dozen years before they mature. They live about 20 years at most. So that's a long-term investment to feed these fish just to get a little jar of caviar. Pretty interesting fish, if you ask me. Now, there are two species of paddlefish that have survived to the modern time. There's the American paddlefish, which is this picture, and there's another one called the Chinese paddlefish. The Chinese paddlefish was only found in the Yangtze River in China, period, nowhere else. So we have the American paddlefish in the Mississippi drainage and the Yangtze River over there. The American paddlefish, the world record is 198 pounds, pretty big. But the Chinese one was 1,000 pounds. These were just massive, massive paddlefish. And unfortunately, they have disappeared. So the Yangtze River had a lot of pollution problems. And when the Three Gorges Dam was built in, I think, around late 90s or so, that was the end. And the last paddlefish ever observed was in 2003. And so we're pretty sure the Chinese paddlefish is now extinct forever. Very sad. So this is all we have left now for the paddlefish, but we're still doing okay. And Montana is the best of the best. We It's a pretty well managed program. The state has a tag system of 1,000 fish per year, and when the tags are filled, that's the end. And it seems to be just doing fine. The species maintaining itself. So, spirit bird for such a weird, historic fish. I can't think of anything remotely like this in the birds. Maybe you Audubon people would have an idea. The best one I can come up with was the American pelican with its bizarre beak, and it just looks so ancient and old. That's the closest one I come up with. I know it's kind of lame. Sorry. Okay, how are we doing? Any questions, or are we doing okay? Or we got 2 down, 5 to go. We doing good? Okay, I got a thumbs up from Gail there. All right, our next one is the pygmy whitefish. This one's a little bit more cerebral and how interesting it is than the paddlefish. This little creature is on average about 6 to 8 inches long. They're generally on the small side. They kind of look like a cigar. They don't have any remarkable colors or anything like that. But I think they're really kind of interesting. And they're well named pygmy because they are quite small. And you can tell that they're whitefish. A couple clues that give it away, it's a whitefish, is the adipose fin. So on the back of every fish is a dorsal fin, that's usually the main one, and trout, salmon, whitefish, and grayling have what they call an adipose. Is that second fin? It's a really small little lump. It's a fleshy little lobe thing right there. That's a clue. We have a trout, salmon, whitefish individual right here. The whitefish have a really interesting mouth. It's not a simple hinge like a trout. They have a pretty complicated mouth. Pygmy whitefish, you don't want to confuse them with the other whitefish that are found in this area. A lot of people have seen the mountain whitefish. There's a drawing of them on the top left. That's the one that's commonly found in our rivers and some of our lakes as well. They readily take flies in the fall. They're actually pretty easy to catch. They have that strange whitefish mouth, but theirs is even odder than most. A mountain whitefish, the mouth comes out kind of point-like, if you will. And then there's the lake whitefish, the pictures on the right. These are just massive fish. They're not native to Montana. They were introduced in Flathead lakes a long time ago, and they are by far the most abundant biomass in Flathead Lake. It's not lake trout, it's actually lake whitefish. Don't want to confuse them. The pygmy whitefish really doesn't look like either one. Remember, they're quite small, cigar-shaped things. What's fascinating to me about the pygmy whitefish is where they're found. They are found on the very bottom of big, deep lakes. They like it down there on the bottom. And I do mean the bottom. They never seem to come off more than 1 foot off the bottom. They like it deep. They like it dark. They like the pressure. They like the cold. And what they're doing down there is they're slowly moving around. They seem to move around in schools. And they're looking for crustaceans or insects or dead stuff that fell down from the top of the lake, if you will. And every now and then they are caught by ice anglers who are jigging off the bottom. They are active year round, which is, now all fish, fish don't hibernate, but a lot of fish slow down a lot in the winter. The metabolism drops, not the pygmy whitefish. They're maintained the same rate all year round. So they can't be caught in the wintertime by ice anglers. I think why ice anglers can catch them and not in summertime, ice anglers use really small jigs, tiny little jigs so the fish can get its mouth around it. What's interesting to me is where is this fish found? It's widespread in Alberta and British Columbia in these big, deep lakes. Note that's both sides of the continental divide there. And it's found in one lake in Russia, just one, and it's found in one river in Alaska, the Naknek River, which is a very big, deep river, and nowhere else in Alaska. And it's found in Lake Superior and not any of the other Great Lakes. Like, okay, this is a very strange distribution. And locally, it is found in Lake McDonald. Like, oh, okay, that makes sense, right? Big, deep lake. And found in Flathead Lake. Okay, that makes sense. A little bit of root. Okay, we can believe that, but seems like a strange one. Then it starts getting weirder and weirder. Bull Lake is not that particularly deep. Swan Lake, okay, maybe we can buy that one too. Holland and Lindbergh, which are upstream of Swan Lake. All right. It's found in Sealy Lake, but not Salmon Lake. And oddly enough, Ashley Lake, this one's a mind bogger. Ashley Lake's not deep at all, and they're extremely abundant in Ashley Lake. Okay. And then Hungry Horse Reservoir. Now, Hungry Horse Reservoir, it's an interesting clue. Clearly, this fish did not get over the dam to get into Hungry Horse Reservoir. And it was not in the river when we dammed it. Because remember, this fish is only found in the bottom of deep lakes. So it must have drifted down from somewhere upstream. So probably big salmon lake has, I'm going to guess, not pygmy whitefish, and nobody's ever bothered to look for them. Now, this list of local lakes, you might go, yeah, it's a lot, but think about where it's not found. We have a lot of deep, dark lakes here in the northwest Montana, and we don't have them. Why are they in Tally Lake, or Bowman Lake, or the rest of Glacier Park, Salmon Lake, Kukanusa, and Whitefish Lake, for God's sakes? They're not even found in Whitefish Lake. And here we have a pygmy whitefish. So to me, this is kind of an oddball one. I think I'm going to guess what happened is this species is been isolated for a very, very long time. Probably got moved around the glaciers, then they retreated, and that's all they're left. And they're kind of all alone, these little islands out there. And why they aren't becoming all inbred is interesting. I don't know why. There they are. So the spirit bird, well, I couldn't think of anything other than the pygmy owl, I guess. I mean, because they're pygmies. The best one I can come up with this guy. Okay. Now we're going to get really into funky science here. This is absolutely mind-bending species, the hybrid dace. And at first glance, you're going, oh, how boring can this be? We're talking about a dace, all right? Hold on, people. This is a really interesting creature. So dace are small minnows. They are true minnow. And you can tell dace from other minnows because they have really tiny scales. They're almost invisible, but they have a slight sparkle look to them. And like I said, they like streams. Prairie streams is where they're found in our area. Northern red-bellied dace and fine-scale dace do readily hybridize, apparently. And we have this thing called a hybrid. And in the 1970s, the biologists started to notice, wait a minute, these hybrids, all of them are females. Every single one is a female. They couldn't find a male to save their lives. And so a biologist watched them. When they're ready to spawn, they notice they need a red-bellied dace to trigger spawning. Oh, they get all excited and they lay their eggs, and the red-bellied dace moves off, and all of those eggs are hybrids, look just like their mother. And wait a minute, oh my God, these things are clones. They're exact replication of their mother. And the male red-bellied dace was fooled into thinking he was doing something because he was contributing nothing to this whole thing. Here's what really gets even bizarre. We in Montana have lots of red-bellied dace. We have no fine-scale dace. We have never had a fine-scale dace, ever. And yet we have this hybrid that shows up here. So, okay, we got some funky science going on here. How do we have a hybrid dace when the mother species is not found here? Again, it's a clue that this thing is a clone. So this is freaky science going on here. And remember, we all thought, oh, clones, it was a big deal. Do you guys remember Dolly the sheep back in the late 1990s or so? How excited the scientific community was that we made a clone. We made a clone. One. We made a sheep. That was it. And then the sheep died. And these days have been doing this thing apparently for a long time. And so because of the fine-scale dace has not been found in Montana, the nearest fine-scale dace is over in Minnesota. So somebody smarter than me thought about this, like, okay, before the glaciers advanced and long before they retreated back again, possibly the fine-scale dace was in this area. We don't know. These clones may therefore be 50,000 years old. They might have been doing this for so long. We don't know if you get a fresh batch. It's unclear. If you get a fine scale and a red belly, to get a fresh new thing, nobody really knows. It seems like these clones are just happy to do their own thing, and they don't really interact much with the fine scale. And of course, they're abusing the male red belly dace because he thinks he's contributing something. It's not. So here we have something that successfully clones up over and over and over. Now, the hybrid, when the hybrids are found, they tend to be very abundant. In fact, they're more abundant than the parent species. And that's what we have definitely here in Montana. We certainly have the red bellies, but we have a lot of hybrid clones. They're always more numerous. And it's interesting, the fine scale dace is an insectivore, and the red belly dace is an herbivore, but the hybrid can eat either one. And so maybe that's why it's more successful. It has a wider variety on the menu, if you will, so it can contain itself all the better. Where's it found in Montana? Well, this map is, I know it's kind of hard to read. Don't worry about all this stuff, but basically we find the hybrid pretty much in the same range as the red-bellied dace. That makes sense. Remember, with the hybrids have to have the red-bellied dace to trigger spawning. If it doesn't have a red belly, they don't spawn. So you have to have at least some of that parent spirit's going to go along. But it is interesting. Is there any place where we have red bellies, we don't have hybrids? We're not sure, and vice versa. It's not one that's readily studied. I mean, who wants to spend a lot of money to analyze this thing that's not a game species? I think it's pretty interesting. It's a clone, right? Is it a species? I don't know. That's a really interesting question. Think about it. Is it a species? It's maintained itself probably for 50,000 years. But is it really a species? I don't know. All right, what spirit bird? What would be its best twin in the bird world? Oh, I can't think of any bird clones out there, but I could think of a hybrid. And so I do a little inner search on that one. And apparently herring gulls hybridize a lot. You guys would know better than me. Okay, so here we have this bird that's not taken very seriously sometimes, like, it's just a gull, but yeah, okay, they do hybridize. There must be something going on with that. There must be a reason why they're doing that. Okay, I'm going to cheat now. This next fish is not a fish. Sorry, cheating. You guys are not getting your money's worth on this one. So this guy is a tailed frog, Rocky Mountain tailed frog. And at first, the picture, you may not see him. I recognize that, but just keep your eye on the picture and you'll see the frogs. They're going to start showing up in there. They blend in beautifully. You see them okay? Yeah. So the tailed frog is only found on cold trout streams and never really rivers. They like smaller tributary streams. The adult form, which is in this picture right here, is never more than a few feet away from the river's edge, the stream bank edge. You will not find this frog in a wetland or sitting on a lily pad or anything like that. They're not like a toad. They're not going to leave the water altogether. They stay very close to the trout stream. They're fascinating little frogs. They're unlike anything else. Now, they're called tailed frogs for a good reason, because the male has a tail, if you will. It's a reproductive organ, sort of. It's the only frog that I'm aware of that practices internal fertilization. That's bizarre. But if you think about where it's living, cold, fast streams, yeah, the usual frog method may not work to kind of put your eggs on a lily pad. That trout stream is going to wash those eggs down right away. So it's actually internal fertilization. It's unusual. But what's really fascinating to me about this tailed frog are its tadpoles. So some of you may have seen these things before and wondering, what the heck is this stuff? Is it a leech or what? It's scary. It's not a leech. This is a tailed frog tadpole. So they are drab black in color in most locations. Although in the Swan River Valley, there's an interesting mutation going on where there's a bright yellow spot on their tail fin. But other than that, tailed frog tadpoles look nondescript. If you flip the tadpole over, which is hard to do, they will hang on to their rock. You'll see they have a big sucker-like mouth. It's a rasping mouth. So what they're doing is the tadpoles are grazing the periphyton on the surface of the rock. The periphyton is that slick stuff that when you're walking across the stream and you slip and your feet going every which way, has a real fine coat of algae and stuff like that. That's what these frogs are eating. Like, there's a lot of it out there. Have at it, boys. And they're just grazing along, eating that stuff. These streams are cold, and normally a frog in a wetland is only a tadpole for a few weeks, right? And once become adult, quick as possible and hop along. Whereas the Rocky Mountain tailed frog tadpoles are tadpoles for about 2 to 5 years. They just take their sweet time. And maybe there was no reason to hurry up to become an adult. They're just having a good old time as a tadpole. You will see these little tiny legs on these tadpoles, and they'll keep those legs for a couple of years. They're just not rushed to become an adult. In fact, the picture on the left, if you look really close, you can even see the tiny little legs picking up right there. They blend in quite well to the rocks. Fish apparently don't like to eat them. They must taste awful. I mean, otherwise they'd be picked off right away by a trout. But when they finally leg out, they become a regular frog. They will mate and then die. The adults don't survive the winter at all. So pretty interesting frog. This is a frog that acts a lot like it's a fish. So, spirit bird, what kind of bird would act a lot like a fish? Well, To me, that's the dipper. It's very similar. The dipper is a bizarre little bird. It thinks it's a fish sometimes. It's walking underwater eating algae. So I would say the jet frog's a lot like that. Okay, suckers. So suckers always get a bad rap, and I want to straight this rap out once and for all. I want the Audubon Society to be in the know. Suckers are really cool fish. They're not trash fish. I can't stand when I hear that expression. People say, oh, suckers are trash fish. No, they're not. Suckers actually require really good water quality. Now, they can take turbid water, but they have to have good quality. They cannot take pollution at all. And they right away get lesions if they get pollution and die. They're actually indicator species for problems like that. We have 9 species of suckers in Montana, and 2 are found on this side of the Continental Divide. Those are the large scale and the fine scale, and the others are found on the other side. Blue sucker, I just picked one randomly just to talk about. In fact, this is a picture of a blue sucker. So they really are blue. Isn't that cool? I mean, how many fish do you see that are blue? All right. Blue suckers are found in the Missouri River. And we're going to just talk briefly about all 3 of these, and then we'll talk about why they're so cool. So here's pictures of all 3 species side by side. The blue sucker, again, it's kind of slaty blue. It has a very long dorsal fin, kind of a sail-like thing. This is found in the Missouri and Yellowstone rivers and other rivers elsewhere in the United States as well. It loves fast, deep rivers. This is the exact opposite of the sculpin that I talked about before. Remember the sculpin's a fish that didn't like to swim? Suckers, blue suckers, love to swim. They swim all the time. These guys are Olympic swimmers. There's constant emotion. And so as a result of where they live, they're very hard for fish biologists to study. It's actually one of the hardest habitats in the world for a biologist to study are deep, fast rivers. It's really hard to put your nets in that stuff. Blue suckers, as far as we know, we think they eat insects. I mean, it just shows how very little we know about these things. They get pretty big. We think they live about 20 years. Not really sure about that one either. Large-scale suckers are found in the Columbia River drainage. Large-scale suckers, you can tell from fine-scale suckers by the base of the tail there, it's kind of narrow and they have large scales, thus the name. These guys are also insect eaters, and I think they can eat plant matter as well. And occasionally you can catch them on a fly. This picture shows a male and spawning colors. Most of the time they're all uniform colors, so don't be fooled by that stripe. That's not how you tell them apart. Then there's the fine scale sucker. Fine scale sucker is also known as the long-nosed sucker. It's the same darn thing. The long-nosed sucker is found circumpolar. So it's found in Russia and Alaska, Northern Europe, Canada, the United States. It likes both rivers and lakes. And in Ash Lake, there's a heck of a lot of these things for some reason. They can be quite abundant sometimes. All suckers spawn in the springtime. They all run up tributaries in large groups and broadcast their eggs and hurry back down to the lake where they came from. All right. So here's what I think is neat about sucker is the Native Americans figured out a long time ago how delicious they are. Suckers are actually a very good tasting fish. They have nice white flesh and they get big and they're actually pretty easy to catch. So it's a win-win situation. I think the problem is European Americans disdain suckers because they have a lot of Y bones in them. They're very bony fish. So if you harvest suckers, and by all means, harvest them, keep them. I recommend you can them just to get those bones softer. So the Native Americans really like suckers, and they focused a lot on these things. Now, these pictures I stole from the internet, and I couldn't find any truly authentic drawings, if you will, of our local Salish and Kootenai Indians, how they did this. But basically what the Indians did is when the suckers go up the rivers to spawn, they would put these little nets or baskets down below them and then push the fish. They kind of stampede them, get the fish all scared, and the fish try to go back down the lake, and they get caught in these baskets. And they quickly would spear them. And because these are large fish, and suckers are usually 5 pounds, no big deal for a sucker to be 5 pounds. That's a lot of nice meat to put up for a while. So it's pictures of a couple traps. Apparently there was a pretty good local Kootenai Indians, I believe, had a good trapping system on Dayton Creek down in Lake Mary Ronan area. That's very popular sucker fishery. The suckers are quite rare now, but at one time there was quite a good fishery. Ashley Lake, like I mentioned before, still has a lot of fine scale suckers, and there was a commercial fisheries up into the late 80s where actually the sucker meat was sold to Canadians. All right, so pretty cool. So next time somebody tells you, ah, sucker, it's a trash fish, you correct them on the spot. They're not a trash fish. They're actually really neat native species, and they do require good water quality. So what's a spirit bird? Well, what is a bird that you can think of that gets a bad rap for some reason from Eurasian, European Americans? I would say that'd be the magpie. People just look down their noses at the magpie. It's a trash fish. Yes, they're bound by garbage dumps sometimes, but they're still beautiful species. I admire them. I think they're very clever. I like their goofy tails. Okay, our seventh and final species is, of course, we have to talk about the bull trout. This is our local celebrity, to say the least. So I want to be, now maybe you probably all know a lot about bull trout. I'm not going to tell you anything new, but still, look again for the first time. Pretend you didn't know anything about this guy. This is a large trout, all right? Large. And they can easily get to 15 to 20 pounds. That's big. And the record is 26 pounds in Cotton Swan River. Big boys. They're called bull for a reason. Bull is an old English word for big. Oh, so we should call them big trout, really, but they're called bull now. They used to be called Dolly Vardens. Dolly Varden was a character in a play, I think around the turn of the century, back in 1900 or so. The woman, Dolly Varden, always wore a green dress with orange spots. And so back in the time, people, oh, that looks like a Dolly Varden dress. Here this fish is a greenish fish with orange spots. In 1972, they split the species and they said, okay, henceforth, Dolly Vardens are going to be what we see in Alaska, and everything down the lower 48 we call bull trout, okay? So bull trout spawn in streams, and the first 2 to 3 years, they look like a small, shy little trout, like anything else, if you will. And the guy on the left is a bull trout, and they have clear dorsal fins. So this is I'm going to give you quick pointers here on how to tell bull trout from brook trout or hybrids. Look at that dorsal fin. The guy on the left, bull trout, clear fin. Ones on the right, if you look at those dorsal fins, they got spots or stripes. Those are hybrids. Or they could be brook trout. So if you're not sure, look at the dorsal fin. Now, a juvenile bull trout is almost entirely nocturnal. They're very shy of light. They will spend their day under a rock if they possibly can. They just don't want to be bothered with anything. And at night, they emerge from the rock to eat insects. They don't eat fish, not that age. And around age 3, they have to make a decision what they're going to do with themselves for the rest of their lives. And in our area, almost all the bull trout will move downriver, downstream, and either become big fish in a river or a lake. We call them fluvial or ad fluvial. Fancy terms, don't worry about that. Or they can stay put in a stream like a resident fish. Resident bull trout never get large. They will only maybe get 15 inches at most, live about 6 years. They look a lot and act a lot like a cutthroat trout, but they're not. Obviously they're a bull trout, but they just stay in that stream the rest of their life. In the Flathead, for some reason, almost all the bull trout move down to a lake, probably because we have so many lakes, and they get really big in the lake. They switch their diet and they start eating to other fish. So they are predators, and they move around the lake constantly. Whatever's in front of them, that's what they eat. They don't select. As far as we know, they don't seem to have a preference for what they're eating. As long as it's fish, they can catch it. They're fine with it. All right. They can get quite large. And then when they're ready to spawn, they return to the same stream where they came from. So they're our version of salmon. They go right back to the same stream we came from. Unlike a salmon, however, they can live to spawn again. Thank goodness. It's kind of a nice little trick they have. So they'll spawn, turn around, and go back down to the lake for winter, leaving those eggs up there to fend for themselves for a few years. Because it takes a lot of energy to spawn, most bull trout only do it every other year, if you will. They're not going to try to do it all the time. So they have to make a decision about August or so. Do I have enough energy reserves to run up the river to spawn again? They have very impressive spawning runs. Think about all the swimming they have to do, go from Flathead Lake, say up the North Fork of the Flathead River. They will go all the way to Canada. I mean, it goes a long way. Pretty neat fish. They are, when it is time to spawn, there is some sexual dimorphism. The males will get much brighter color. That weird snout start to form, which actually retreats later on. Whereas the female just has a normal looking nose. The fish on the top, the red belly, that's a male. And the one at the bottom looking right at the camera, it's a female. What really fascinates me about this fish is how it spawns and where it spawns. It makes what we call a redd. All right, redd is spelled R-E-D-D, and it's another old English word, so you're getting all kinds of knowledge in this thing. Redd means clean. So to redd a stream is to clean a stream. So the female goes first. She'll turn on her side and flap, 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 flap with her tail, turn over the gravels, clear them up, get that silt off that piled up all summer long. Then go up again, lay the eggs. The male puts his sperm right on top, and then she covers them up with gravels right away. They turn and depart. These fish seek out groundwater input. They demand the best of the best for trout streams, and they are wise enough to look for these little tiny springs that they can smell because they're laying their eggs in late September, and the eggs sit there in the gravels until 1st of February. So right now there's still eggs out there. If they laid an egg in a spot that didn't have groundwater, there's a really good chance the eggs would freeze solid. So these guys are pretty smart. Looking to groundwater, it's nice, fresh oxygen, fresh water all the time moving through the redds. The fry emerge about February 1st or so, and they, like I said, they're very shy, nocturnal things, and they'll drift off the edge of the margin, and they're going to wait for 2 or 3 years before they head back down. These redds are very big. That's why I got the picture of my boots, and they're giving you an idea how large these things, because these fish are big. All right, they're not going to make these little rinky-dink little brook trout redds. These redds are about 4 feet by 4 feet. Big, bright, beautiful redds. They're very vulnerable when these fish spawn. We used to have a real problem of poaching in the Flathead area. People knew that. They would go out there with pitchforks and spawn these bull trout right when they're ready to spawn. Spear them right when they're ready to spawn. Fortunately, poaching seems to really fade away. And I'm glad people in the Flathead Valley have learned to appreciate the bull trout. So what would the spirit bird be for such a majestic, charismatic fish? Well, it has to be the majestic, charismatic bald eagle. And with that, I'm done. How about that? Short and sweet. So folks got any questions? Be happy to answer questions. I know that's fast.
I have a general question.
Sure.
What is the impact of the spring runoff when the rivers and streams get really high? What adjustments do the fish have to make to that?
That's a good question. And they have to make a lot of adjustments because not only is the river high, but it's usually very turbid. And so trout or any fish that uses vision to find fish, they have to get out of that muddy water. So they will move to the margins, hide behind a rock, whatever it takes, lay low. They don't eat much during the big runoff. Other fish like the runoff, and that's when they feed the most, like paddlefish. That brings a lot of nutrients on down there. So which particular fish were you asking about, Dave?
I was thinking mainly about trout.
Okay, yeah. So during the runoff, trout do have to get out of the current. Now, cutthroat trout spawn in the spring. And so when the current subsides a little bit, they're going to start moving up. In Montana, we have actually 2 peak runoffs. We have the first one usually about the 3rd week of May, and then about the 1st of June, we have a second and final runoff. You know, it clears up and it gets muddy again. Right off the second peak runoff is when the cutthroat trout spawn.
Oh,
yeah.
Okay.
Good question. What other questions people got? I can't see the chat box, so I don't know if anybody's got a question there. You have to.
Oh, I put something into the chat box. I was wondering if you've heard. I heard it on the internet, so it's got to be true. The tailed frog has got its nearest genetic relative is in New Zealand, and it sort of brings to mind the concept of Pangea, you know, in terms of when it's split off from each other. I'm not sure about that, but it's such an odd thing, and you know, to have a genetic relative that far away on the other side of the planet. You would have to think about when these amphibians first started crawling out of the water and what the ancestor was, you know. So,
right.
I don't know.
Observation.
Yeah.
Yeah.
I was wondering about the paddlefish's paddle. If they tilted it upwards somewhat, could it affect the turbulence of the water coming at them and possibly collect more of the kinds of things that they eat? Just as a guess, you know. I'm not sure if they've tested that, but
it's actually a good guess. And there was a theory going for a long time, right on that thought, is that the paddle is almost like a holds the fish steady, if you will.
Mhm.
So when it opens its mouth but doesn't nosedive.
Yeah.
And so I think that's why the biologists cut it off, the poor thing. And
Oh,
yeah,
gee.
the fish can still survive. I don't know. I mean, it could be true, but there are other fish that also have large, wide mouths, and they don't seem to have the battle. So I guess we
Okay.
really don't know.
Yeah.
It's a good guess.
Just wonder if it changed the regime of the current of the amount that they could collect, you know, the turbulent regime.
It could be.
Yeah. Cool fish.
Yeah, it is cool fish. Such an ancient looking thing. What a time traveler.
Hmm. Yeah.
I have a question,
Yeah.
Beth, about the clone. That just such a strange story.
Yeah.
So they've done the genetics on this clone or on this hybrid
Mhm.
in all the where it's been found. And you're saying every one of those has the same gene, or is it within a stream that they all the same genetics?
Oh, that's a good question. I don't know that one. All I know is they've confirmed that the offsprings are exact copies of their mother. All right, but I do not know if there's subtle subpopulation differences going on there. I don't think anybody knows. And
Yeah, I
to me,
just wondered if
I
they
would
were
tell
all
them.
related.
Say again, please.
Oh, if they were all related to one, one
Yeah.
original, and
I
that would
don't-
be weird.
That'd be hard to believe because remember, even clones have differences. Apparently, there's other clones out there in nature, and there's still external differences sometimes. Yeah.
That would be really interesting to know
Mhm.
just how many variations there are of these clones.
I
That's
agree.
cool. Thank you for that. That was cool.
Yeah, I'm wondering if there might be fresh new clone material going in sometime to the population. Are the parent species still making clones? I don't know. Good question.
Beth, this is Lewis.
Hey,
I'm
Louis.
pretty sure I've caught pygmy whitefish in Dickey Lake up here in the past. Is that possible?
It's possible. I don't have any records of that. In fact, when I looked up that list of all the lakes, I confirmed with Fish Wildlife Parks. They said,
Okay.
okay, this is all that we know about. So
Okay.
it's possible you have big whitefish we don't know about, or maybe those are mountain whitefish. Check them out. Mhm.
I'll have to pay more attention.
Right on.
Question, Beth, if no one else wants to speak up at the moment. And this is actually kind of coming off of the whitefish bit. So you were describing the pygmy whitefish was like a benthic species, right? They were hanging out in like super deep water. I guess I had two questions about adaptations to that sort of environment. The first one is, and this is kind of my like lack of experience with limnology in this sense, but like, is it warmer down there? Let's say if it's like the dead of winter, is it going to be warmer down there than close to the surface in the water? So is that kind of like a climate buffer for them?
Yes, yes, it is. The surface of the water is right at freezing. That's why there's ice up there. The bottom's the same temperature year round.
Right. Okay. So they don't need any special adaptations for
No.
being able to deal with super cold temperatures. So I suppose like the trout and other fish that are more near the surface more are the ones that need to worry about that.
Probably, because most trout are more epilemic species. They don't like the depth and pressure. The one exception is lake trout. Lake trout can be just fine at deep stuff. Mhm.
Got it. Okay. And then my second question was whether pygmy trout have or pygmy whitefish have any strange, like, are their eyes really weak, or is there evidence that those are becoming vestigial over time? Because it sounds like if they're just in pitch black all the time, it doesn't really seem necessary.
Yeah, it's a good question. They have large eyes, but I have no idea if anybody's studied if they are weakening over time. Now,
Mhm.
they do occasionally move to shallower waters, all right? And it seems to happen in the springtime. So it's probably associated with spawning, but we're not really sure about that either, all right? One thing about pygmy whitefish I did forget to mention is, because you brought it up, because they're found in the bottom of the lake, what are they eating down there? They do eat mussels. And where they're found in the Great Lakes, Lake Superior, there are zebra mussels now in Lake Superior, unfortunately. And so people looked, oh, are the pygmy whitefish eating zebra mussels? The answer is yes, they're happy to eat zebra mussels, but the caloric intake was really poor, and the fish that were eating the zebra mussels weren't looking great, and no way would we think that they were going to be a biological control.
Oh, wow. So that's like an ecological trap sort of situation where they might start eating this trash food that's not that good for them. And then,
Exactly.
wow, okay. Yeah,
Mhm.
that's great. Thanks so much. Fantastic presentation.
Thanks, Chris. Thanks, Charles. Appreciate it.
Regarding the cloning, Beth, I was just wondering if there's any way to tell how long the clones have been clones, evolutionarily, because you would think that without any genetic mixing, eventually the environment could change enough to make those guys kind of obsolete. You know what I'm saying? I'm wondering if, as a survival advantage, how long they've been around, and if so, how.
That's a great question. I will not be able to answer that one. I think that would be, if I was into conservation genetics, this was a species I would study.
Yeah.
So if it truly is, a clone has been on for 50,000 years, like they're thinking about, like, we should look at that thing. Really?
Yeah, for sure.
Or how's it maintained itself? How's it not prevented inbreeding and stuff like that? It's just bizarre.
They were probably planted as by alien cyborgs as an experiment,
Yep, you're on to us. Yep.
Yeah.
Any questions? That was fascinating, really
It
good.
really was cool.
Yeah, lots of
Thanks,
things
Beth.
I did not
Appreciate it.
know. Go, Dave.
You
What'd you
guys are
say?
fun audience. Thank you very much.
Yeah.
What'd you say,
Thank
Dave?
you for the presentation. Very
Oh,
nice.
very nice, yes. I might even like suckers. Well, I know they were critical for river ops, and most eagles, osprey is the prey. So it's
There's a
very
lot of
important in the food chain.
suckers.
Yep,
Yeah.
yep.
Mhm.
No, that was great.
Good job, Beth.
Thanks, guys.
Thanks,